And it always cracks me up a little bit. We're first going to start by adjourning the HCOG board and convening of the Policy Advisory Committee.
I move that we adjourn of the HCOG meeting and convene of the Policy Advisory Committee.
And second?
Do we have to all in favor? Do we do that? I can't remember on this.
Normally, we don't have to do a motion, but since we're already
okay.
there, we can.
Okay. Well, so we'll just go with it. Okay, and the third thing on the agenda is public participation. This agenda item is reserved for matters that are not on the agenda that may be presented by the public over which the PAC has jurisdiction. Is there anyone in the public here wishing to address the board on anything not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, I'll close public participation. And then 4, we're at approval of the meeting record from November 21st, 2019. Do we have a motion?
I so move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, the 5th, report on Eureka Arcata 101 Sword Safety Corridor supplemental patrols. And we have Sergeant Gary Whitmer here. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to say a few words. Sergeant Gary Whitmer made time today to come to this meeting at the request of the board from our previous meeting. And I just want to say, in light of the fatality at the Indianola interchange, sorry, I thought we could have a discussion on things that we can do in the interim before the project is built. There was a citizen who was hit on the corridor from Blue Lake over a year ago. It was longer than that. And she has had ideas that I have not moved forward, so I want to apologize for that. Her ideas that we have discussed, even at the board level, it hasn't gone through implementation, are painting the number 50 in the travel lanes to remind people of the speed limit. This board also requested staff to look into a movable message sign. And Caltrans did request a formal request, and I did not take action on that, so I do apologize for that. But I think that is worth a continued discussion. I also spoke with Captain Stacy Barr, and she did let me know that speed was not a factor in the accident. She's meeting with Caltrans, so she meets on a regular basis, and she'll be discussing the accident. And I also asked her for her ideas on what we could do in terms of education. She agreed that putting the speed limit in the travel lanes is a good idea. She was in support of a movable message board, so that is something I can definitely move forward to Caltrans formally, whatever form that takes, and anything else that this board recommends. So with that, I'll leave it to Sergeant Whitmer.
Good afternoon, staff. Thanks for letting me be here today. This overlaps with our sergeants and staff meeting, so I apologize that I usually can't make it, but they were able to kick me loose a little bit early today. I'm mostly here to answer questions and just tell you a little bit about what we do and how we work some of the overtime. So I guess I'll go ahead and start with that. So as some of you know, our department's significantly shorthanded. We've hired quite a few recently, but they're in the training program, so we've been understaffed for quite a while, and we no longer have a traffic division due to that staffing. Therefore, our officers sign up for overtime such as this on a volunteer basis. We don't assign it, it's all voluntary. And we have to also juggle our Office of Traffic Safety grant, which is a traffic-related grant that governs certain types of overtime that we do. So we have certain goals and objectives we have to meet with that. So we have to juggle these two with a limited amount of officers, and quite frankly, they enjoy it. During these times, whether it's in the corridor on overtime or working Office of Traffic Safety overtime, dispatch cannot use those officers for calls for service. The officers get to go out and have fun. They get to pull people over, write tickets, and not be bothered by having to deal with a drunk guy or a car crash here or a theft in custody, because according to these agreements and our grant with OTS, we can't do that unless it's an emergency. If it's an emergency, then all hands down, we go handle that, and then we stop billing either corridor or OTS and do that appropriately. Safety is our primary concern. So in juggling these, there's some times where there's officers out there almost every other day. So I basically have corridor enforcement on odd days and OTS on even days, just so we don't overlap. We don't have enough dispatchers for more than one officer to be out being proactive, because some officers go out and never put the mic down. They're on the radio making stop after stop after stop. So dispatch wouldn't like it if they were 2 officers out there. It would be extremely busy. So the officers go out, usually the commute traffic times when the majority of the collisions happen. Their primary goal is to be highly visible, conduct, usually it's radar or LiDAR enforcement, primarily speed enforcement using radar or LiDAR, and pull people over and write tickets. Try to educate people, change people's behavior by being really visible. I know when our officers are out there, because on my commute home, the traffic's really slow and going the speed limit. And when they're not there, I notice traffic is flowing a little more quickly, or somebody will be zipping in and out of people. So I know when our guys are out there. I've had calls from friends asking, hey, do you have anybody in the safety corridor today? Because I'm in a rush and I'm trying to get, I'm like, yeah, we have 5 guys out there. Don't speed through town. They'll all write you tickets. But anyway, I do keep some stats. Some are pretty interesting. I forward those to Marcella, usually on a monthly basis once we get them all input. And I've noticed that the majority of really, really high speeders, I don't know if you guys have gotten the list from, okay, well, I have it broken down differently. It was the year of stats from November 1st, 2018 to the end of October 2019, and just each month, I usually call it the winter. And so like the winter for December last year was an 82 mile an hour driver, and they were from Arcata, an 81 mile an hour driver from McKinleyville, and what was the other one? A 78 from Arcata and a 72 from Blue Lake. And it goes down the list. I think our highest was 88, and that was a person from Arcata. So it's not the out-of-town visitors coming and just being oblivious to all of the signs that say, here's how fast you go, even the speed feedback signs. If you're not familiar and you go past one of those, oh, crap, it's really 50 through here and I'm going 65. So it's local people who know better, who choose to speed. And they get to win the prize of a ticket and being our winner for that month. We do have a couple of out-of-town people. Now, I can't tell just because if they have an out-of-town address. I try to look at the age. I think a lot of those are HSU students. So I found that rather particular, that our local people are just choosing to go not just fast, but at one point 38 miles an hour over the speed limit. So that really gives people trying to cross, say at either Indianola or whatever the next one is there, by Bayside, a lot less perception reaction time. They have to perceive that car, make a quick decision whether they're going to go or not, and then cross that intersection. You have a lot more time when they're going 50. You can perceive that, make a decision, maybe think about that decision, and then make it safely across. What else? Not only did we make at about 1,500 traffic stops, we issued a little more than 720 some odd tickets, but we arrested 47 people. Some of those were for misdemeanor warrants for some petty things. There were some pretty violent felons that were driving through the safety corridor, choosing to speed. They probably went back to prison. One was a wanted sex offender. So not only does the speed enforcement get targeted, but when we come across these folks, they go to jail and their cars get towed. So that's about all I have as far as stats, but I can answer any questions that you might have and explain some things.
Thank you, Sergeant. Any have questions?
Yes, 38 miles an hour, doesn't that enter into the realm of reckless driving?
It could. Usually with reckless driving, you have to have 3 or more violations. So not just somebody speeding, but somebody speeding, making unsafe lane changes, maybe also on the phone with a small child in the car. It could be pushing that. So when we do write that ticket, the courts get that, and then the courts have discretion on tiers of fines. So somebody going 10 over the speed limit, you'll get the base fine. At 15 miles an hour and over, the fine increases and you're not eligible for traffic school, which would keep it off your record. At 33 miles an hour over the speed limit, it's a good chance the judge is going to take your license for a year.
Thank you.
Hey, when you've been doing these patrols for a while, how long have you been doing these?
It
patrols
was
that are-
November 1st,
So,
2018.
Okay, is there any indication that you're making changes by being out there? That
I think so. I have friends calling who
Well, I
are
mean,
scared to.
I guess I mean that I know
Yeah.
when you're there, it's obviously going to make a change, but do you think it's actually helping traffic all the time, regularly?
So unfortunately, I am unable to obtain CHP's traffic collision reports. It's not a system that I have access to. I've called and requested it, and it was difficult for them just to narrow it down to the safety corridor. The gentleman I was talking to, he would have to look it up by the Highway 101. So I think Marcella might have a way through Caltrans with milepost marker information to narrow it down, and then we can really see what type of impact, if it does reduce the amount of collisions. I think we've seen some behavioral changes in the way people drive in the corridor. At least I think I have, because I drive it twice a day, in the mornings and just about during the commute time at 5 o'clock. And I think people pay attention more.
Thanks for your presentation. I know that part of the program is to be highly visible so that people are aware and it reminds them, which it seems to do. But as you mentioned, during off times, people are still jackrabbiting through, changing lanes and so forth. Do you have any unmarked cars that might patrol at those odd times? And I suspect that word gets out pretty quick and you'll get calls from even more friends looking to know if the stealth car is out today.
So the law requires that if we're doing traffic enforcement, we have to have a marked car. We can't have like Oregon, if you've ever seen in Oregon, just a powder blue car sitting in the median that has no markings on it whatsoever. Oregon's allowed to use unmarked cars for traffic enforcement. I wish we could. That would be super fun. I rode a motorcycle here for probably about 14 years doing traffic enforcement, and it is night and day. The things I would see in a patrol car compared to the things I would see on a motorcycle. Night and day. It's an excellent tool. People just don't see you, and it's a lot more effective, and it puts a lot of fear in people, knowing I can't see this motorcycle like the big SUVs that we drive, and you can, see them 2 blocks away. You can put your cell phone down and keep going. The motorcyclists were quiet and they buzzed all around, and they would get you when you're not looking. So
Thank
I
you.
wish we could.
Okay. Susan wants to.
So I was wondering, besides speeding, what other unsafe habits do you see? And we don't get the tickets on those, or we don't get the reports on those. We just get the speeding ones. But
There's a variety. We've had some officers cite for no headlights, not just in the safety corridor, but during times of inclement weather. We've had lots of people driving on a suspended or being unlicensed or uninsured.
are you checking their licenses as they go by? Is that how you?
No.
Oh, okay, so they're speeding too.
So the primary reason why they're being stopped, I guess, would be speeding. Some officers who don't have certification with the use of LiDAR or radar will have to visually estimate speeds, and that can be tough for a new officer. So they're looking for registration violations, headlights out, other things that they can make a traffic stop for. You never know what you're going to get. So not only that, you're impacting, 50, 100 people that are driving by that traffic stop, assuming this guy's getting stopped for speeding. And you're changing their behavior. But we come across people who have open containers. We had a DUI. We had one person that just didn't stop and led us on a pursuit. We actually had one officer working the safety corridor who was involved in the pursuit with the carjacking that happened at the gas station. He just happened to be sitting out there. There was a carjacking. The lady got thrown off the hood of her car. The suspect sped out of town right into the hands of the corridor officer, and he chased him to out Arcata. I think he went out 299. CHP took over the pursuit. They lost it, and we actually, I think, recovered the car the next day. So I'm just reporting on the speeding, but
You guys thinking distracted driving and.
that's definitely tough. I've worked the corridor before. It's tough to see the cell phone violators. Maybe for a younger officer with better vision, but they're going by pretty quick, and if there's a glare, it's tough. Same with seat belts. I'm all for writing cell phone and seatbelt tickets, so they're definitely tough to see. But there's just a variety of things. We've made drug arrests, all kinds of different things. You name it, we've done it just here in the corridor things.
All right, anyone have further questions or thoughts?
Cool. Okay, I was just gonna say, I've been making a lot of runs up to McKinleyville, Klamath even, and Crescent City. I've noticed, I try to go in the 10 to 3 p.m. hour because I don't want to get caught in the commute. And I've noticed that there is a tendency now for people to drive slower. I'm not gonna say everybody's doing 50, but my experience is you don't see the big platoons of 65-mile-an-hour cars going through in the faster lanes. So.
Right. Just for the few times I've been out there to do it, it's actually more difficult to do speed enforcement during the commute times. Traffic's so congested. With LiDAR, you can beam a car and pick a specific car out. With radar, it gets all of them, but it wants the biggest and the fastest, and you have to visually estimate that. But trying to get out after these people is quite challenging. A little more challenging for Officer Aiello, who crashed into a lady who he was trying to pull over, which was pretty embarrassing. She didn't get a ticket. He should have. So myself being out there, it's tough to get out there and safely pull out and get them. So the fun times are before the commute and probably a few hours after the commute. When traffic is sparse and there's nobody ahead of you, that's when the people decide, I'm just going to take off and go. Yeah, those are the fun hours. We've had some officers report on some pretty good things.
Yeah, okay, so I have one suggestion and one question. The suggestion is, we tried something in Blue Lake a few years ago, and what we had was a parked police car with a dummy in the front seat. Just parked where the school was in Blue Lake, and people would slow down. And no tickets were given out, obviously. After a while, people got savvy because they were waving to the dummy and he wasn't waving back. Anyway, that's just a funny suggestion. It worked for a while.
We've had that. We've had a dummy car, and with a dummy in it, one person actually called because they thought he was asleep, but he started to deflate. And then they left beer cans and apples and things and such on it. We do have a ghost car. That we call it a ghost car. It's a police car. It just doesn't. We don't have the radios and stuff. We were leaving it at the hotels and things for theft-related reasons. We could implement that and put that out there, but as you said, people get wise to it. People vandalize stuff if they know it's unattended. Believe it or not, they would do it to the police cars. And the manpower, we've lost the ghost car a time or two because somebody would put it out and not write it down, and we would forget what hotel, well, not we, but my guys, they would forget what hotel it was at. So we'd have to go look for it and inevitably jump start it and hope the tires still had air. But it's a good idea.
It's something that worked for a while. Well, obviously, you'd have to move it around, that kind of thing. And then my question was, looking towards the future, because I'm concerned about you talking about your problem with not having enough officers. Do you think you can sustain the level that you've been at for the last year?
Actually, I think it's going to increase. We currently just hired, I'm in charge of background investigations and recruiting. So we just hired, we just had 6 come out of the academy. One had a little hiccup. She'll have to go back for a little refresher. And then we have 2 more officers starting on Monday the 3rd. So we will have 7 brand new officers out on the streets solo probably mid-March, early April, depending how their training's going. With that being said, I know the chief, our collision rankings through the Office of Traffic Safety, the most up-to-date statistics are from 2017, and we're ranked number 1 for the worst out of, I think it's either 92 or 94 cities our size, 94, for injury and fatality traffic collisions. So one of the priorities that the chief has is to reinstate our traffic division again. And having traffic, they're designated specifically for traffic enforcement, collision reduction, and we would also handle the traffic collision reporting. But they're specifically designed to go out, write tickets, educate the public, slow people down, reduce crashes. So within a few months, we'll have a lot more officers willing to go in the corridor or work Office of Traffic Safety overtime and write tickets.
Okay, anyone else have any thoughts or anything, suggestions? Okay, well, thank you, Sergeant.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate the opportunity.
report. Okay, now we have number 6, the consent calendar. A, approval of the City of Arcata's fiscal year 2019-20 local transportation fund claim. B, approval of the City of Blue Lakes fiscal year 2019-2020 local transportation fund claim. FFY 2020 Federal Transportation Administration Section 5311 Program of Projects. We'll be approving that. That's what I think that's saying there. And then D is FFY 2020 Federal Transit Administration Section 5311F Rural Intercity Bus Program Applications. These are 2 resolutions. So do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar items?
So moved.
Second.
Anyone in the public? We have a motion and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, approved. Now we're on to 8, PAC action items. A is Local Government Planning Support Grants Program, Early Action Planning Grants, 25% advance allocation. Can we have a staff report?
Yes, Senate Bill 113 and Assembly Bill 101 were passed that provide one-time funding to Council of Governments statewide. The goal or the use is to assist councils of governments in the regional housing needs process with an ultimate goal of accelerating housing production statewide. So this is, like I said, one-time funding. And to remind everyone, the RENA process, Regional Housing Needs Allocation, has always been an unfunded mandate. So we're very thankful that the governor approved this. Our CalCog is an organization we belong to, the California Councils of Governments, and the executive director worked really hard to make sure that the governor understood that funding is needed to do the planning. So this is the result, these bills. For the Humboldt region, just under $790,000 is available. The law does allow for an advanced allocation, 25% of those funds, and that would be just around $700,000. And the purpose of the early allocation is to coordinate with our local governments and the public. We have to develop a work plan to tell the state how we're going to use those funds and decide what kind of planning is the best uses of those funds. So staff is requesting only 60,000 of that 195. The remaining does not go away. It stays with the main dollar amount. So we would still have over 700,000 of funding to implement a work program. Our recommendation is included in the application that's attached to the staff report. We have identified some tasks that we think are important to work on. Before we do need to develop that work plan, and the guidance for the work plan and the use of these funds won't be out until February. So we want to start doing our early planning work. So I can tell you that in the past, for the RENA process, I did not delegate to the staff because it was very political, and it's just a very, I would say, difficult job. So I would like to have a compensation study done for our senior planner to identify the new tasks associated with this work. We're asking for just under $5,000 for that. The rest of the tasks include us being prepared, starting to work with our local governments and the public, getting everyone educated, and doing the research that we need to do to make sure that we're a success in this project. If you have any questions, you can ask me or Una, who's been really working on this.
Okay, thank you.
So my question is, tell me again why we are tasked with housing when we've been mostly involved with transportation issues.
In the late 1960s, we were formed under a specific government code, 6554 something. And then when the housing element law was developed, they identified those agencies that were formed under that code would be the best suited for housing. Now I can see, I mean, housing and transportation is linked. So if we were a larger metropolitan area, we would have to do a sister study as part of our RTP showing the linkage between housing and transportation. So we don't have to do that now because we're so small, but I see that happening in future years.
So then I guess that
We're never funded for it.
then that dovetails to my other question is that, so you're asking for compensation, and do we have the expertise in that field to be able to deal with the issue of the housing needs?
In my opinion, yes. That's something that the board can discuss as well. I think Una is well suited for it.
Well, I mean, you know your staff.
Yes.
I'm just, asking you your opinion.
We might have to hire a consultant to help with some other things, but.
Stephen?
Yeah, Una, can you explain the process that you will be going through to work with the local governments and develop a work plan?
So just with this initial stuff, I'll start off from where the last RENA discussions were with the community development directors. And then there are a whole lot of other organizations that with this kind of money we can bring in. And as you know, when we start talking about housing supply and not enough housing and housing demand and homeless services, the ball of wax gets very big. I will be reaching out to all the social service providers too, and we have really good relationships formed that we can take advantage through our SS TAC and have them help us also get to more staff who can help us. And then I want to reach out to all the advocacy groups and the people who are houseless themselves and advocate for them. And I went to a HCD, Housing Community Development meeting when state staff came up here. And so I met and heard some of those people who were advocating for housing and such and hearing those kinds of things. So I want to first lay the groundwork for what kind of advisory groups, working groups, engagement, participation people are going to want. And I'm just going to be taking a lot of direction after a lot of discussion, hopefully, from the different cities and community development departments and other departments that they want in on it. And for example, like Arcata has, and Eureka also has, transportation safety councils, commissions or committees. So all the layers that start coming into it, we'll reach out and invite them to participate and tell us how are we going to best participate and make tiers. Some people want to be actively engaged. Of course, people who are staff members have the most, not really the most, because some of us have more work than we can get to in the timely fashion we want to. But you know the advantages that staff have as opposed to people who have other full-time jobs. So just try to figure out how are people going to be able to participate in the way that they want to. And we have made this budget so that we can hire consultants even for this leg. So I'll be hiring some professional facilitators to have broader discussions and just work with those professionals to even set up the meetings about, you know, when we have one meeting, what should the discussion be? If it's too broad, we don't get good feedback, but we also want to know when it's going to be contentious and prepare for that. So this part of it is really forming the group, trying to get the word out up and down the county that people know they have an opportunity, and then working with those people to figure out how do we even do this part, and this part is to decide how do we do the big part that is actually implementing how different jurisdictions are going to increase their housing supply faster. And it might be really different, right, for every jurisdiction. So we also have to figure out a way, how are we going to balance it? Maybe, you know, do we just want to come up with a menu and then every jurisdiction takes from the menu what they want? And we'll have plenty of examples from bigger metropolitan planning organizations that we can draw on, but we'll also be looking for smaller ones. And then hopefully then we'll have a product that's an example for other people.
Thank you.
I have a question. I'm wondering if we're using the 60,000 to kind of fund this effort you were just talking about, but then we have like 710,000 or something like that left. Is that matching funds for future grants that we might get, or is this all kind of part of California's desire for rapid kind of rehousing? Is that?
Yeah.
That's what is
Yeah.
helping to fund this right now.
Yes.
And then is there more money coming for? Because I'm thinking like, I don't remember the numbers exactly, but I feel like, 40-unit lower income housing in Arcata, if I can come up with a number, I'll just say it costs like $1 million or something like that. And so this wouldn't even fund one. So I guess I'm wondering, like, how's this working?
Yeah, I can step in for a second. This is really a planning effort, so a lot of more money is going directly to cities to create housing. From what I hear, this is a one-time fund, but you never know. If it's successful, the governor could put it in the budget every year. The guidelines aren't out yet. Una might have more information on if she knows what's coming, but until we see what the guidelines say, this funding will mostly be to do studies, planning, to assist the creation of building housing.
Okay. And then, let me just finish my thoughts there. And you probably are going to include this group, but it seems like you should talk to, like, say, Dan Johnson or Danco or people who are doing these types of projects, because they could have ideas or thoughts. Just make sure we don't leave them out.
Yeah, all developers and the real estate associations, and it really, there's almost no one that's not involved at all,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Okay, let's see.
One thing is, I've heard that I think it's SB5 Wiener's bill is coming back again for another round, and it still has a bunch of contentious stuff with local control in it, and how he's trying to use the city's general plan to use in a wider area rather than in local sections. So that's going to have a lot of money tied to it. And I know that it sounds like you've done a lot of legwork already, researching and planning and discussing with people, but I was curious as to how the the compensation and classification study was going to be done. Was that a in-house or consultant?
Yeah, we're going to work with Clausen Associates. They're currently under contract, I understand, right now with the county for a very large class and comp. HCOG did a class and comp with them in 2009. But we are looking for a professional to give the board a recommendation.
Thank you.
Looking for just a quick response on this one. We are having a certain amount of money that we will be distributing to projects in the county. And then you mentioned that there will be money going directly to local jurisdictions. How will that money be distributed? What's the process by which those communities get money?
Well, when I say that, I don't mean the 700,000. I'm speaking of different money through Senate Bill 2. There's a lot of opportunities that exist now.
Okay.
And I do expect additional funding to come through.
Right.
So that would be on program by program. It all goes through HCD.
Okay.
So,
Very good, thank you.
yeah.
And as Marcel said, the guidelines aren't out, but even in the application for the pre-allocation, we know that we're allowed to have sub-allocations, so some of that big pot can and will go down to the other jurisdictions. This seed money is to figure out how to get consensus on how everyone decides who gets what.
Yeah, so I understand that out of that 700,000, like if the city of Arcata or some other entity wanted some of that money for planning purposes, they could get that.
Right.
Thanks.
Yeah, ultimately, it would be this board's decision on how that goes out.
So then is the way you're thinking is that you're going to spend the 60,000 first and sort of try to have some coordination and some planning before people start to, like, you develop the menu or something?
Yes, because we have to turn in another application for the full funding and tell the state how we're going to spend it, how we would even spend sub-allocations. So this planning part is a pretty major undertaking because even though it's planning, it's as close to a project as a plant can get in my imagination.
And if you decide it needs more than 60,000, you have up to the 190 or something that you can use for planning, is that right?
We could use the 700,000 for planning. It's just that the 190 we can get right away. So we only asked, as Marcel explained, we asked for 60 of it, so now it just is in our big major rest of the fund pot.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Am I being clear?
Generally, I get what you're saying.
When we do our work plan and request the full amount, then it'll all be incorporated.
Okay, thanks. Stephen?
May I make a motion?
Sure.
Right. I'll move that we adopt Resolution 2001, a resolution of the Humboldt County Association of Governments authorizing the Executive Director to enter into, execute, and deliver a State of California standard agreement to secure the Regional Early Action Planning Grant Advance Allocation.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. And let's see, what is next? Next, we have 8B, Support Letter for Complete Streets Act of 2019. We have a staff report?
Yeah. So before you is an invitation to consider supporting some legislation on the federal level. The one that the staff report covers is Complete Streets Act of 2019. There are companion bills in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. And we can be proud that California passed one of these in 2008, and now the feds are at least Congress people and the feds are now doing similar stuff. So this one, that the draft letter is prepared for you to send to Feinstein, Harris, and Huffman. This act is the federal proposal that states set aside 5% of their existing federal highway money to establish a competitive complete streets program. And then we also have our representative Huffman has also introduced legislation which is the acronym comes out to Green Streets Act. It's the Generating Resilient, Environmentally Exceptional National Streets Act. And I gave a sheet on your desk to let you know that what that one is generally about. And what I am asking for you all to consider is that perhaps in the letter to Representative Huffman, if the board also supported his Green Streets Act, that you would want to say that in the letter along with the one asking him to co-sponsor the other Complete Streets Act in the House of Representatives. So his legislation would not directly affect the COG in any kind of mandate or stipulation. It directs the Secretary of the Department of Transportation. And then the Secretary on the federal level would have to establish minimum standards about greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled and start showing that that department is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Then the federal secretary would also be mandated to work with states, and the legislation as it is right now just says states, so it can be broader than just the state DOTs, but other state agencies to also have policies and plans to reduce the per capita vehicle miles traveled. And then he has in it that if a state is found to be not in compliance, then they would have to spend some of their federal highway money that they already get to come into compliance, making more complete streets that then impact greenhouse gas emissions and per capita VMT. So the states and the MPOs, the metropolitan planning organizations, have to do a lot more proactive stuff to put in these new kinds of policies and work towards complete streets. And they have a fiduciary carrot and stick to do that. So there's nothing that I could say this legislation is going to impact the COG unless at the state level, when California agreed to, when California would be following the new law, if this passes, then maybe some more competitive grant programs or other kind of funding might have a different performance measure, or in some way that the state decides to comply with the Complete Streets Act, then that may have an unknown ripple effect to the COG about, when we get Complete Streets money in the future. But it's unknown. But as far as this giving us more restrictions, there's nothing in the law that applies to COGs or RTPAs at our size.
Okay. Anyone have any thoughts? There's no one in the public. I was just reading through this, and I appreciate the Complete Streets concept, but I feel like we've kind of left something out there. And I think my trip to Santa Barbara around Thanksgiving kind of drove this home to me, is street trees. Street trees, I think, should be kind of woven into the Complete Streets idea for many reasons, partly because they sequester carbon. They slow people down because they have a presence, and you feel it and you slow down. And they oftentimes are sort of added next to the sidewalk, so they also make the pedestrians safer. And I think they also add beauty and elegance, and I was really taken aback by how much they added to the town. And Santa Barbara recognized that. I read about it and said that they had a fire went through their town in, I think it was 1925 or something, and they had to rebuild back, and they put street trees in. And so now they're all, close to 100 years old, and they're beautiful. And they take a lot of pride in them. They have a whole section of their city webpage about their beautiful street trees. And I recognize up here that because we live in a forest, a dense forest, we crave sunshine. But I have been looking around, and I see a lot of opportunity for street trees. And I really think, particularly as we're putting in complete streets, and, we're adding bike lanes, and we're adding pedestrian facilities, we should just have that. It really is maybe a foot wide of just kind of a green space between the pedestrians and the cars, and you can put some trees in there, and you have to pick the trees kind of carefully because you don't want them breaking up the sidewalks, but that's been done. We've worked through that information before, so it's just something I want to bring forward because I think it really adds huge elegance to a town, really, and it sequesters carbon, and I felt, because what I saw in Santa Barbara is the beautiful street trees were in fancy neighborhoods and in not fancy neighborhoods. They were egalitarian also, and they made everything just look a lot just nicer. So to me, at this point, complete streets should have street trees too. So I just wanted to say that. Yeah, Stephen?
I'd like to concur on that. Was traveling in a small community that had sort of rough and tumble neighborhoods, and one street was lined with street trees, and the next block there were no street trees. They were yard trees more than anything. And the difference between those two streets was amazing. The houses were better kept up. There was less stuff in the yards. With the trees clearly added a sense of pride to the people who lived in that block, and they kept their properties up better. So I think it serves lots and lots of beneficial purposes. We have a lot of main streets that are, or several that are major streets that are part of Caltrans' system, and I'm wondering what Caltrans' position on street trees is. We're looking at Broadway, we're looking at 5th Street, 4th Street, Highway 211. There are a number of places where street trees might play a role. What is the Caltrans position on street trees?
So Caltrans recognizes the benefits, the traffic calming benefits of street trees. One of the challenges is who maintains the trees. Typically, we enter into a maintenance agreement with the local agency to maintain the street trees. Currently in ongoing discussions with the city of Eureka to develop a maintenance agreement for street trees. I'm not aware at this time of other discussions in other communities. The city of Eureka has a pretty long main street,
Right.
so you can see why some would be pushing for street trees.
Great. Thank you very much.
So, and in that respect, we had a very long conversation about this not too long ago. We have a whole Keep Eureka Beautiful street trees plan that avoids anything that touches Caltrans. And I hear that locally we're trying, that you guys are being really good to help, but that really from a higher level, there's a lot of limitations. So including street trees and something that's at a higher level than that gives us more freedom to do it would be really awesome, because we all recognize that particularly down in the south side of Broadway, a little greenery would just help.
Yeah.
We really don't try to keep it not beautiful. We're working all the time to try to beautify it, but we hit barriers.
Well, as an example, I lived in Willow Creek in the 1980s, and I was going to the community services district at the time and going, we should put street trees in here, it's so hot. And people are just flying by and they're getting to Weaverville where finally there's a tree they could stop and have a lemonade, And finally, I don't know, was it 10 years ago, maybe 15 or something, that Willow Creek put those trees in? And just look at it now, like as you're heading into Willow Creek, just the way it feels, you feel like pulling over and getting a lemonade, And it just took a long time. At the time, I was promoting trees down the centers, and they went for the sides, which is okay. Either way, you can get that softness and again the carbon sequestration, which we seemingly need as much as we can get of that at this point. So,
Yeah, can we, on our local plan that we get the money from you guys, for example, for the city of Arcata or any entity, include street trees as our complete street program? I mean, there's no prohibition against it, right?
So I'm not, so the complete streets that we have is HCOG. We have a complete streets element in the RTP.
Right.
And in there, we could define that as the board directs and then assess it through community comment and such. But
It wouldn't be done independently by the entity. Like if Arcata wanted to take and say, we want street trees to be part of our complete streets plan for all the streets.
yeah, so I don't think you need HCOG's permission to do that.
Sure, thanks. But we can use the planning money from complete streets.
Yeah, if it's part of your housing, whatever, your housing strategy for increasing supply, and in that you might want to be updating your code or doing a complete streets plan, that would be your prerogative to propose that.
And Councilmember Patino, are you speaking of using funding to actually put in the trees, like physically? Oh, just the planning, okay.
Yeah, the planning so that the street trees are included in the plans for
Okay.
future stuff.
Well, going along with that, I think that when we're looking at this letter of recommendation, which, I like, we can also add that as a component to our letter. think
yeah, I
we
was
should.
wondering about that. It struck me as
Could we?
maybe just to.
I mean,
follow.
we're a board, we can do this.
Okay, great.
We're
you.
making the decisions here. The wording is not important, but
Right.
the expression of what we all feel is.
Okay, well, great. I'm glad. you
So
did
I
that.
would move that the PAC recommend that the HCAOG Board submit to Congress members Huffman, Feinstein, and Harris a letter of support for the Complete Street Acts of 2019, House of Representatives Bill 3663 and Senate Bill 2077, with adding some wording concerning the desire for street trees.
I'll second that.
And how about that addendum for the support letter?
Oh, yeah. Oh, good point. Okay, that's right. So I will amend my motion to also include the addition of the letter to Representative Jared Huffman introducing his Green Streets Act to be mentioned as his letter.
And I will approve the amendment.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. And thanks for supporting the street trees so much. Okay, now we are at 9. We reconvene as the HCOG board, and so I'm looking for a motion for us to approve the PAC recommendations.
I so moved.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the PAC recommendations. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed, motion carries. Now we're at 10, HCOG staff and PAC member reports. So, Councilmember Avis, you wanted to make a report on, Caltrans report on last chance grade?
Thank you. At our last meeting, Councilmember Gordon Johnson gave a very good summary of the presentations that were made in Crescent City regarding the improvements to last chance grade. And I had been given an opportunity to attend those sessions. and I took a few photographs, and I thought that his oral report was very comprehensive, but I thought a few photographs might be helpful as well. So the day we got there was foggy. It may be foggy there a lot, which belies the fact that the Pacific Ocean is directly below you, and you could hear it echoing up through the fog, but you could not see much down there. But there were a lot of us. We had a chance to actually get out and walk the site where all of the cars were going by. We were under traffic control at that point. They had people allowing traffic to move through one lane going northbound and stopping and allowing southbound traffic. So it was pretty congested at all times. This is a big wall that was built to keep the landslide. There are 4 major landslides that are affecting the last chance grade, and each of them is moving in a slightly different direction and at a different speed. So any impediment that you put in its way gets pretty twisted pretty quickly. This wall was put up, and within a few weeks it already began showing signs of wear and tear, where it's being some repair work here. So as you can see, this whole region has been rebuilt. It's now, instead of a single line, we have offsets, and that they're building barriers in between at different angles, trying to contain that. But those just keep moving farther and farther apart. And it just gets more and more complex and is nonstop. It's costing the state $7 million a year to keep the road open. This road acts not only as a primary route from California to Oregon, but it serves as a local route for the residents of Klamath and Crescent City. School children traverse this regularly. There are people living in one community that work in another community. A workaround is about 8 hours going all the way around to get through. There is no other route, and so the state has made this a priority to keep this route open. The work that they're doing now is simply to keep the road open, and so we'll look at some of the concepts. In the meantime, there is a plan for a new bypass, but we don't know exactly where that's going to go, and there are a lot of options that are being considered. And as the person in charge of the Caltrans project for this said, probably it will be something other than what we are looking at today. That's the edge we were looking down, and it was pretty intense. That's a pretty sheer drop off. There was a wall that had been supporting that, and that whole wall has essentially slipped off and down the hill. There are a series of walls marching down towards the Pacific that just keep moving farther and farther away from the road. With the loss of this one, they had to close the southbound lanes of traffic because it was encroaching into that. We were standing on a little bit of it. So the large wall that we saw earlier, see if this goes backwards. The plan is to raise the roadway up another 19 or 20 feet and be able to sort of get up on top of this ridge in order to have enough space to do both northbound and southbound lanes. The last chance grade roadway now is approximately 20 feet thick, just from layer after layer after layer of asphalt that's been put on it. This is not a new problem. When they converted the wagon road into a first sort of a more permanent roadway, the people with picks and shovels said, this is not a good place to build a road, and suggested moving inland. And they were told that would be too difficult, just keep on digging. When the highway department began to pave the area in the 20s, they noticed the same issue. that the roadway was unstable, would not hold in place, the paving wasn't going to last, suggested moving inland, and the same response was, be too difficult, we need to just keep paving. So the can has been kicked down the road as far as it can. So now we have the edge that we're trying to deal with. These are the supports that are put into the ground to try to stabilize whatever retaining wall is built. These are 100-foot long support beams. And they get driven into the ground with a giant hammer. And then they build another support wall, which lasts for a few months until it is slipped down the hill. And the process is repeated. Hence the $7 million a year to keep the road open.
Do they put cement around those posts?
I think they're just, no, they're just driven into the ground. So at the time, the Three Amigos was a cute word. However, things have changed politically. But these three gentlemen worked really hard to do a really brilliant thing. Jared Huffman, Jim Wood, and Mike McGuire. They decided that projects, well, not unlike the wind project we recently had in Humboldt County, all have issues with different agencies. CEQA requires consultations with all sorts of groups, agencies, and so forth. So they decided to bring all of the stakeholders together first, get them together and say, this is the project we're going to go through. We want to expedite this project because of the huge cost savings to the state to get it done quickly. We want to know what your concerns are early on. We want to be able to deal with these issues in a comprehensive program package so that when it comes back to you for reviews and approvals, you can move forward more quickly. So they have all of the stakeholders at the table together. They have tribes, they have Caltrans, they've got Fish and Wildlife, they've got NOAA, they've got everybody who has a hand in what's going to be happening. They're looking at several routes, two of which include tunnels, routes that go through old-growth redwoods. They're dealing with the national parks and the state parks. But they are committed and made clear at the meeting that it is their idea to get this project through as quickly as possible. And the reason we were having this main meeting was that this was a session where the California Transportation Commission sent 2 commissioners to come up to hold the town hall meeting to actually see on the ground what was going on. And they had approved $40 million to cover the environmental studies that are needed to look at to evaluate all of the different options for getting a bypass to the east of Last Chance Grade. So it was very educational and very sobering to be there to actually look over the edge and see what's happening. You realize how tenuous that roadway is. There are crews out there almost 24 hours a day working to keep it open. There's a woman who's been working on this project there as a crew leader. She's been there for 10 years. This has been her sole job, is working to keep this roadway open. So there's a lot of tenacity on the part of the people who are trying to make this happen. I think that this last slide really was a huge setback. So now a lot of effort going into redefining where the roadway is going to be. So as you travel north up to Crescent City, be mindful that what you're passing on will soon be gone farther down the road, and you'll be on new territory, but eventually you'll be able to be farther inland where they can do the work. So it's quite an experience. I appreciated the chance to go and be part of that.
Okay, thank you. Is there any questions? Do you have a question? No. You look like you want to? Yeah, Kevin?
Yeah, I'll just provide an update on some of the activities. Preliminary geotechnical investigations, Phase 2A is ongoing and is 70% complete. Phase 2B, The drilling is expected to start in October of this year. They had a public meeting for the environmental document, and the comment period ends today, actually. One permit is needed, and that's a coastal development permit. On December 26th, a $31 million contract was executed with HNTB as the prime and a group of many sub-consultants. The consultant team will take on all of the technical work to get through the environmental phase of the project, which will include bringing on disciplines to get the job done, including tunnel experts, environmental scientists, and geotechnical experts. As mentioned in the presentation, Congressman Huffman has a working group of stakeholders that meet on a regular basis to discuss aspects of the project. The next meeting will be on February 5th. That's my update. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Johnny?
One of the other things that, along with you were talking about the people going to Oregon and that kind of thing, there's also an airport in Crescent City, and there's quite a few people from this area that fly into that Crescent City airport and then drive down. And a friend of mine just did that and was explaining about that particular route. But apparently, a lot of times it's easier for the planes to get into Crescent City than it is to get into Eureka. So that's another issue where people are traversing that area.
Okay, that was just information, right? We don't need to do anything, okay. Thanks. And next we are at 10B, the Blue Lake Rancheria Transit Study.
Yeah, this is another informational report to present the Blue Lake Rancheria Transit Study. HCOG acted as a consultant to the Blue Lake Rancheria. The original scope of work was to look at potential new service to Fieldbrook, Western Glendale, and Corbell. And the initial results showed under a 10% fare box to those areas. HCOG extended the scope of work to include McKinleyville, and in doing that, it jumped up to just under 15%. This final report was presented to the Blue Lake Rancheria Tribal Council. They reviewed it at their December meeting, and they did decide not to move forward with any changes at this time to keep with their current service that they provide. But this report can certainly be used in requesting 5311F funding, 5311 funding that we had on our agenda today. Those are federal programs that require some kind of a study of report if you want to request operating assistance for new services. So that has that value. In addition, if our local jurisdictions decide to implement, we have a good basis here. The other issue that is coming up is we are going to be moving forward with a study of McKinleyville for a standalone transit system. Supervisor Madrone is interested in that starting. It is dependent on the county paying the match, which is, I think, only $27,000, and the institute in Montana is going to provide service for the rest of the work. It's over $50,000 worth of work. So that study can certainly look at this study to see if there's any partnering to do. The issue of an unmet transit need of Blue Lake to McKinleyville isn't necessarily a need, as the service is already provided. You just have to take 2 buses. So if a McKinleyville resident that wanted to go to McKinleyville would take the Blue Lake bus to Arcata and then up to McKinleyville. So I don't see this as meeting the threshold as an unmet need. The SS TAC will certainly look at that. But that doesn't mean that the city of Blue Lake and the county of Humboldt could coordinate on working with the Blue Lake Rancheria for this service. And with that, I can answer any questions.
I have a question. I'm wondering if the state of California is, if you know, if they're looking at any of this, this idea of kind of making bus rides free. And so, I know, I mean, that's kind of the first response I had too, when I first heard it. I was like, yeah, right. But then, the more I'm getting used to the idea, the more I'm like, this might just be a brilliant idea, kind of hidden behind something, seemingly funny. Because it just seems like it could potentially, we wouldn't have to develop so much parking. I
Yeah.
mean, there is other monies we're spending on transport that, if we really, and maybe we'd actually change our culture into something that used more public transport, because currently, it's not the culture.
Yeah, I can say that, I don't know about the state, but Supervisor Wilson is very interested in this subject. I've had one meeting, it was a while back, Una's meeting this month with the group to continue the conversation. A few months ago, we did send a letter to Representative Huffman regarding our rural needs in the transportation bill. We did add that free bus service to rural areas is something we would like him to look into. So we put that out there a little bit. I'll let Una speak to any other information she has with respect to the state or anything else.
I can report that in the California Transportation Plan, I think it was the 2040 plan, it was the one done a while ago. And in reading that, buried like in an appendix under assumptions was a bullet that said all transit would be free. And I wrote in my comments, what are you talking about? Like, transit's not going to be free. I don't understand where this assumption comes from. And that's the last I ever heard of it in any document.
Well, I think for this to happen, it would have to be at state level. I don't think we could fund it ourselves.
Well, I
even
can-
for our county.
I attended the McKinleyville Municipal Community Meeting, McMac, and Supervisor Madrone did speak there, and he did say that he saw that it's something that the Board of Supervisors could consider is coming up with $1 million. That's basically what the fares would be for the regional system in order to make that happen. So there are discussions going on. I'm not sure where they will end, but I've heard it mostly in our county, not so much in the state.
And that number comes from having to have a fare box ratio. So if the federal law were changed, you would maybe not need, the amount of money you need is based on what the feds will not give you money for. So
Right,
it also
okay.
would be something at, a policy at the federal level to consider
Right.
tooting our, being a squeaky wheel about.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, with the standalone system from McKinleyville, is there an idea when that study would happen?
The consultant put out the month of March, so I still have to work with the county to see if they're still interested in supporting it as a local match. If they don't, we can bring that back to the board for next year's budget, but that would delay the study.
Thanks.
Yeah.
An item on that. I believe it was at the Cal-LAFCO conference that I attended recently with Paul. There was a presentation on free fares for public transit. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that West Sacramento has instituted that in order to improve their ridership, and it has worked dramatically.
Yeah, well, it's not surprising. With the cost of gas, I mean, it would take a little bit of a culture shift, but then I think people will go, well, I'll try it. And I can see that shifting fairly quickly.
I will say the City of Arcata and Humboldt Transit Authority did receive the low carbon planning operation grants, LCTOP. It's probably wrong. So they have had free transit days. We worked with HTA a few years ago, had free Saturday service through the transits. And I know that, I think the West Sacramento, I don't think it's the whole system that's free, but certain lines, they have instituted the free
The other thing
transit.
that I think has been making inroads for transit is the last mile. How do you get somebody closer to home? And that was one of the things that West Sacramento has been innovative at, that they can get people actually closer to home than just following one main route. And they have some deviations of where they can go. So there's a lot of people are thinking about this, which is really encouraging.
Yeah.
So It's good.
I appreciate it too, and I do see that doing something like every once in a while isn't going to change the culture. It's just not, because you won't even know about it unless you happen to know about it, you know, and people don't pay that much attention to things. It would have to really, it would have to be a shift, and you would see it, and we'd have to talk about it a lot, and, you know, that kind of thing. So, anyway.
My son lives in Seattle, and obviously that's a larger urban area than here, so. But, well, it's just, their ridership is higher, and their funding for, they have, as a senior, you get a big, huge discount. I can ride the bus there all day for $2.50. So it's still not free, but for students, it's free. But as we all know, there is no real free. You can either pay for it on the user end, or you pay for it on the operation end. And they have their car tab fees for Sound Transit District, which basically is from Everett to Tacoma. That's a huge area, because that's light rail and everything else. And some of their car registration fees are like $700-800 for newer cars. You might have heard about that, wanting to drop the car tab fees in Washington to $30. Well, that's what drove it. People were being priced out of existence, basically. But they can build a transit model that is convenient for the user, whereas here, for someone who wants to go from Miranda to CR, it might be a 3-hour trip, you know, by the time you factor in making the trip and then getting there in time for your actual class. You know, you have to time it so that you get the bus in time to get to your class, and then when you want to go back, you have the same issue. So there would be, besides some of the other things like you're talking, the last mile, that's going to be huge for that. And it would also be, in this case, the last hour. How do you accommodate the student or the user that wants to go to work on the transit system? Because that's the thing right now that's the roadblock.
Just as a comment on the entire issue, the literature is showing, yes, that there are a lot of communities really interested in this right now, which is very exciting. But without frequency, the freeness doesn't have much of an impact, because it's just not, you know, a good option for people. And what in tandem is required is a political will to also make unlimited free parking not widely available, and to also have community support and political support to share the roads more. So which means we need votes for taking a few lanes away from important streets, so those connections to the bus can be made with other modes, as you all know, but just reinforcing that.
Okay.
I have a question for Marcella. A while back, we were talking about, or there was some discussion, I don't remember if I was talking to you about it, but changing the formula for distribution for some of the funds for maintenance related, for rehabilitation projects, that kind of thing, with sharing of the funds with the different cogs, like the Bay Area, LA. They wanted to change the formula for how it was distributed, and I just wondered if you heard anything more about that.
The formulas haven't changed very much in the past. There was a bill last year that we sent an opposition letter about, and that was for the active transportation program. Once Senator Bell heard that people weren't happy with it, he did pull it back, and that didn't move forward. And I'm not sure if that's what we were discussing. With that, the big cities were getting. Right now, they get 40% of the funding automatically, and it's only the large 10 urban areas. They wanted to increase it to, I think at first 75% and then 60. But he did pull that bill away, and they're still at their 40.
And the executive order that took $5 billion out of them, I think it was called, I have the resolution for the executive order, but I couldn't find it right
Was
now.
that 1919?
Yeah.
With that, yes.
In 1919, but took it out of the rehabilitation and maintenance fund and use it for, or not use it, leverage it for use for climate, to meet the state's climate goals and transit-related projects. So it's taking funding away from not necessarily expansion projects, but maintenance and rehabilitation projects, which is what small rural areas rely on for adding sidewalks to the streets that don't have them, so you can get kids to school and such as that. And I just wondered if you heard anything about projects that had,
Yeah, well,
how that
that,
was going to be distributed.
that executive order, I don't remember them taking the road rehab and rehabilitation funding, because there was a safeguard voted by the public for the SB1 funding.
That was for the SB1 for the
Right.
gas tax.
Right.
But the fund that it was coming out of was the maintenance and rehabilitation funds. If I remember right, it was also affected shop funds for Caltrans.
So that executive order was requiring a look at multimodal and not solely on lane miles. I don't remember it taking money away. It was more, you have to have a broader look at things. I don't, there was something I was going to suggest that was, when we were going through the interregional transportation improvement program, I'm sorry, the funding where we got $25 million to make sure that our corridor is going to happen. During those hearings, there were some projects that were funded 2 years ago in Central Valley that the governor's office did pull or delay. So he took them out of the programming, and he wanted to keep a separate funding for passenger rail and things that supported his executive order. Since that time, a lot of the complaints were about one project that had already started, so it was already in the environmental phase. So they said, okay, not that one. But they've since kind of stepped back a little bit, and mainly due to poor coordination and communication. So the regions had no idea until they saw in a document that their projects were gone. So it doesn't mean it's going to happen in the future. They just won't probably program additional lanes in the ITIP. That's a program that the governor has an oversight on. So that's a good identification. But we were, again, very thankful to Caltrans that they did support our cost increase. That hearing, by the way, is on the 30th. So I'll be in attendance there and make sure that nothing changes and we stay.
January 30th? January 30th? Is that?
January, yes.
Stephen?
Are you about to adjourn?
Yeah.
Okay, then I will say, this is my last meeting. At last night's city council meeting, the mayor assigned another council person to be on the HCOG, and I have been reassigned to RCEA. So Councilman Robin Smith will be taking my seat beginning with the next meeting. It's been a pleasure to work with all of you, and I wish you all the best as you ramp up for this new decade with lots of money for all of our jurisdictions. Thank you.
Okay, we're adjourned.
As I call it, Dr.